My name's Matthew Halley, and I did my PhD here at Drexel University and at the Academy. And for many years, I had an office right up on a half floor away from here. And I used to come down here to the meetings in this room. So it's wonderful to be back and to see so many friends who've come out to the talk today. Um, when I was living in Philadelphia, I I lived in a lot of historic places along the way. And so today's talk is going to start off where a lot of my stories start off. And this is at the Wick House in Germantown. Back in 2010, I was the caretaker of the Wick House. I lived there for a year and lived in the old historic mansion and took care of the collections and fed the chickens and was a first responder for any crises that happen on the property. And for any of you who don't know, Wick is one of the oldest houses in Philadelphia. And it was a single family, the Milan Wistar Haynes family, members of the Society of Friends, who were members of the Germantown meeting, which is right down the road from there. And this family lived in this house for 9 generations and until the 1970s. And after that, there's a succession of resident caretakers who live at Wick and take care of the collections. And so I'm a very curious person. And when I was living at Wick, I couldn't help but start to get a little nosy and open up the drawers and the cabinets. And I wanted to know what was there in the collection. And there's a whole collection that's offsite too. The papers of the family are, the vast majority of them are in the American Philosophical Society library now. And one of the eras of Wick history that I was naturally drawn to was the era, the 5th generation of Wick, which was Reuben Haynes III and his family. And Reuben Haynes was a philanthropist and a naturalist. He was the founder of the Philadelphia Hose Company when he was in his teens. He was one of the first people to ever put pressurized water through a leather hose to fight fire. Up until that point, the Franklin Bucket Brigade was about all we had. So Haynes sort of made a name for himself in that way. And then he ascended to the position of the corresponding secretary of the Academy of Natural Sciences, which is where we are here today. Although at the time, this was in a different, there was no building at the time when he became the secretary. Eventually, there was a building over around 12th and Sansom Street. The building that we're sitting in today, the Academy began to occupy this site in the 1870s. So Reuben was the corresponding secretary of the Academy from 1813, the year after the founding of the Academy, all the way till his death in 1831. That is a time period that is very important and rich in the history of ornithology. And early on, when I was living in this house, I was looking through Reuben Haynes's diaries. And this is a scan of one of these diary passages. And this particular passage, if you squint your eyes and you look closely at it, it says this: I went with Joseph H. Hill to the Pennsylvania hospital. In the garden in the greenhouse, I caught a yellow bird in the window of, he leaves a blank because he wasn't sure the name of the house. I put it in my hat and took it to Benjamin Marshall's. This is his uncle. And then I let it fly about the room. I took it to Alexander Wilson's after letting the children see it, set it at liberty, stayed for tea. And so we can imagine this wonderful scene. This is one of the earliest window strike pieces of evidence of a bird window strikes, assuming that this greenhouse he's talking about is where he found the bird in the buildings over at Pennsylvania Hospital. And Pennsylvania Hospital was founded in the 18th century and by Quakers, and Reuben was part of this community and came from a very wealthy and well-connected Quaker family. And so when I saw this passage, first of all, I said, the yellow bird. Well, that's got to be the goldfinch, right? This is at the end of October. And Alexander Wilson called the goldfinch the yellow bird. That was the colloquial name for that species in that era. And so Wilson was a Scottish poet who immigrated to the United States in the 1790s and 1794, and was a teacher and a weaver and a inspirational orator, and a very interesting guy, very artistic. And he was the author of the first book that was devoted to depicting and describing the birds of America, the birds of the United States in the early Republic period. So this book was published in 1808 to 1814 in 9 volumes. And the last 2 volumes were published posthumously because Mr. Wilson died tragically at the age of 47. And so, where was Alexander Wilson's house, right? Haynes finds this bird and he puts, if you had a goldfinch tucked into your hat, you're probably not walking very far to get to Wilson's house. So I'm thinking to myself, where is this? And so this is like 2010 or something when I first read this. And I went down there and I walked around the streets around Pennsylvania Hospital, just sort of looking around, wondering what did it used to look like around here 200 years ago. It's hard to get your mind into that space in today's urban Philadelphia. And so one of the places that if you're going to be poking around looking for information about Alexander Wilson, you probably want to go visit the guy. He's buried down at the Gloria Dei Cemetery, and which is down along Columbus Boulevard. And this is the Old Swedes Church. So this church was founded in the 17th century during the New Sweden colony. And Wilson was buried there because he died kind of suddenly of dysentery. And the guy who he was living with, his landlord, was this guy, William Jones. And William Jones, it turns out, was a descendant of Niels Jonasson or Jonas Nilsson, father of Niels Jonasson, the Swedes of the Delaware River. William Jones has old Swedish ancestry in this region. And so if you go down to Wilson's burial site today, this church that we're looking at here, this is an engraving by Cephas Childs, 1828, based on a drawing by Thomas Sully, the great Philadelphia artist. And we see a figure sort of hunched over this sort of a cuboid monument that looks kind of like a casket. That's Wilson's gravesite. And so over the years, there were some different artistic portrayals. That was a copper plate engraving that we just saw a print from that, whereas this here is a lithograph of the same site published in I think this is from the 1850s, 1840s. Here's another lithograph showing this cuboid monument. It's a monument. It's not a casket. His remains are not inside that box. This box was erected there several years after his death. It's on top of the place where he was buried. And it's far too small of a box to fit an adult human. And this is sort of what it looks like today if you go down there, minus the color. And this monument, it has an inscription, and we saw in that lithograph before that there was this inscription on top of it. The bottom right image that you see in that photograph series is the modern inscription, and the inscription was actually recut in, I think, about 1905, early 20th century. There was a stone cutter went and recut the inscription to clean it up a bit, and already now a century later, and it is worn, and it's almost illegible at this point. But this is what it says. This monument covers the remains of Alexander Wilson, author of the American Ornithology. He was born in Renfrewshire, Scotland, and on the 6th of July, 1766, He emigrated to the United States in the year 1794 and died in Philadelphia of the dysentery on the 23rd of August, 1813, aged 47, ingenio stat sine morte decus. The honors of genius are eternal. This is one of the coolest epitaphs I've ever seen. And so when Wilson died in the United States Gazette newspaper, which was published here in Philadelphia, there was a notice published that said that Mr. Wilson died this morning. Mr. Alexander Wilson, author of the American Ornithology, his friends and acquaintances are invited to attend his funeral. From Mr. William Jones's, number 233 Spruce Street, Philadelphia, at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And this is quoted by Whitmer Stone here in the pages of Cassinia in 1913. And Stone was one of the first historians to go back and try to find some primary sources from Wilson's lifetime to try to write a biography of this man who was so influential in the world of American ornithology. So 233 Spruce Street, where would we expect to find that? Between 2nd Street and 3rd Street on Spruce Street, because here in Philadelphia, the house numbers correspond to the 200 block, the 300 block, the 400 block, right? So even in Stone's time, you go down there to 233 Spruce Street, you go down there now and it's a bunch of buildings from like the 1970s. You're going to be disappointed. And I certainly was when I started this research project, 15, 20 years, 10 years ago. I went down there and didn't seem to find much down there at 233 Spruce. So there was an intrepid historian named Elsa Guerdrum Allen who is at Cornell University, and she wrote this wonderful monograph on the history of American ornithology and before Audubon. And Elsa Allen went down to Gloria Dei Cemetery in 1947 with her friend Mrs. Frances Sheets. Never been able to find Mrs. Sheets' first name. She's goes by her husband's name in the literature. And Mrs. Frances Sheets, and they went. They started poking around, and they went and talked to the rector. And the rector said, "Well, we've got this manuscript in the archives. Let's go pull out the burial manuscript from the year when Wilson was buried, and let's see what it says," because the rector should have filled that out and give us some information. And so in 4 years later, when Allen publishes her monograph, she says that in the burial ledger, it's recorded that Alexander Wilson was buried in the lot belonging to Mr. William Jones of 233 Spruce Street, with whom for years he had lived. So, okay, this is great. 233 Spruce Street. We've got a couple different sources. This contemporaneous newspaper article says 233, and here she found it in a primary source from the rector at the cemetery when Wilson was buried. So this seems like good information that 233 is where we're headed. Unfortunately, here's where this the anomaly that started this whole rabbit hole is that 10 years later, there's another biographer named Cantwell, and Cantwell went and transcribed the same ledger that Allen transcribed. And he publishes and says, Wilson lived with Mr. William Jones last in Spring Street near 7th Street. And ostensibly from the same primary source. We've got these two conflicting accounts. And then in the 1980s, Clark Hunter, when he wrote his Life and Letters of Alexander Wilson, published at the American Philosophical Society, and that's where Elsa Allen published her research too, was in the Transactions of the APS. Cantwell wrote a whole book about Wilson, also published through the APS Press, and Hunter. And Hunter says that Wilson lived with Mr. William Jones last in Spruce Street near 7th. So suddenly we've got a whole bunch of conflicting accounts here. And so of course, what we need to do is go look at that ledger for ourselves and see what it actually says, because we have 3 different historians telling us 3 different things. And so here's the ledger. It says, August 24. Alexander Wilson, native of Scotland, but resident here for many years, author of the American Ornithology, aged about 40 years, not married. He had for a long time lived with Mr. William Jones, last in Spruce Street, near 7th, and was buried in his lot. The disease was flux. 10 a.m. So here we have from the rector's own hand, Mr. William Jones, last in Spruce Street, near 7th. This conflicts with the newspaper article that told everybody to come to 233 Spruce Street. So if 233 Spruce Street was between 2nd and 3rd, a whole bunch of people showed up at the wrong place for the funeral. And so was there some mistake in the newspaper? What's going on here? And so let's look a little bit at the map of Philadelphia and get our mind around what the landscape was like at this time. This is what Philadelphia looks like today. On the left of this little map from Google Earth, we've got the Schuylkill River, and on the right, we've got the Delaware River. And this is, of course, bounded by Market Street in the north and South Street in the south. And Spruce is kind of right there in the middle, running all the way between the rivers. And then 7th Street, like the rector's entry in the ledger says, the last house on Spruce Street, near 7th. And so we expect maybe that this place where Wilson lived is somewhere near Spruce and 7th, right? Now, back in Wilson's time, the landscape here looked very, very different. When William Penn founded Philadelphia in 1682, he reserved a whole bunch of land for his relatives in England who never ended up coming to America to settle. And so the Penns had a whole bunch of land that was out beyond 7th Street. And all of that property eventually kind of grew up into a secondary woodlands. It was called Governor's Woods because it was Governor Penn's woods. And Governor's Woods was so almost a century between William Penn's founding of Philadelphia and when Governor's Woods is clear cut. And you'll notice it's clear cut around 1776, 1777. There was something happening around that time, right? And in fact, the British captured Philadelphia in 1777, and we don't have any contemporaneous record of the felling of Governor's Woods, but General Howe, the British general, when he captured Philadelphia, he commissioned a map to be made, and this is what that map looks like. And I've left that black line, vertical line in there to show you where 7th Street is. And then you'll also see that right there by 7th Street, it says hospital. That's the Pennsylvania Hospital, right? Which was already a fixture on the landscape by the mid-18th century. You'll notice there in that little corner up near what's now Market Street. At that time, Market Street was called High Street. And this is the last remnants of Governor's Woods. So this is a little piece of evidence that there used to be forest where now there's skyscrapers. And you'll notice that whole landscape out beyond 7th Street is kind of like pasture land. James Watson, who was a historian, wrote a fabulous multi-volume set in 1830 called Annals of Philadelphia. And Watson went around and interviewed old timers and he transcribed interviews and quotes from Philadelphians that he interviewed in his book, including a lady who was in her 80s, I think, at the time. And she remembered from her childhood when they used to walk out Spruce Street until they got to 7th Street, and then they would enter the woods. And they would walk on a trail through the woods all the way until they reached the Schuylkill River. And so we have eyewitness testimony of Governor's Woods. We've got General Howe's map showing us Governor's Woods. And so this is the landscape, the post-war landscape of Philadelphia when Wilson immigrated in the 1790s. And so we're going to assume here, at least I did, that Mr. William Jones, last in Spruce Street near 7th, it's probably somewhere around here. And when it said last in Spruce Street, that's because it was the last house on Spruce Street. It's hard to even imagine that that could be true when you get to 7th Street, that that's where the last structure is, right? And so in July 2024, I went down to 7th and Spruce. This is what it looks like today. And I pulled out my notebook and I made little notes, and we're gonna, in my notes here, we go from east is on the bottom, and we're walking up Spruce Street toward the Schuylkill River, walking west on Spruce, and we find some houses along the way. The Philadelphia Historical Commission, PHC, they've put these little clear plastic decals in a lot of these historic houses in the window, so you can sort of window shop when you're walking through historic Philadelphia and see some basic information about when the house was built, who built it. Often, and if there's something more notable, we might have a historical marker or something that gives us a little more information about the place. Here right away, I run into this house constructed 1797 by George Librand, bricklayer. These are old colonial federal style brick row houses. Next up, we come to James Weidenfield's house, also 1797. And they're right next to each other, so they were under construction at the same time. Weidenfield was a house carpenter. We walk up a little more and we come to Nicholas Biddle's house. This is probably the most famous house on the block until now. And we find Biddle was a banker and became very well known. He was the first editor of the Lewis and Clark journals. And so well known in the natural history scene in 19th century, early 19th century Philadelphia. He was also a Greek revivalist in his architectural preferences. And so we've got this Greek revival house and a historical marker for Biddle. We walk a little farther down the road and we find John Taylor Cox's house, 1803, and in the federal / colonist revival style. And then we walk a little farther and we got to peer into the window through the screen. And here we say, it says built 1805, William Jones, plasterer. This is the house of William Jones, 733 Spruce Street. Not 233 Spruce Street, it's 733 Spruce Street. And it's this beautiful red brick face. It's got this red Victorian door, probably Victorian era. That's not an original door. Clearly the bricks are original. The marble water table, original. The marble stairs, the stoop is all appears to be original. The boot scraper is lodged into a piece of marble that is the same marble as the stoop. Probably that boot scraper is also original to William Jones's house. So you could go down to 733 Spruce Street and sit there on the stoop and put your left boot up into that scraper and rock your foot a little bit on that boot scraper, and it's very pleasing. And you can imagine at that time, Alexander Wilson sat on that stoop and put his foot into that boot scraper, and he would have looked across Spruce Street and seen an undeveloped lot. That entire block across from there would have been undeveloped at the time, and it's catty corner to the Pennsylvania Hospital. So he would have been able to see Pennsylvania Hospital from the front stoop of his house. This is a residential neighborhood, and there are people living in that house today. Yeah. And so when I found this house on Second, this is all residential neighborhood. When I found this house that day, and you can see me peering in through the window, I respected their privacy, right? And so I was peering. I was like, oh my God, I found Wilson's house. My goodness. Whew. And I'm writing it down in my notebook, and I went home, and now I've got to really start to piece this story together. Now that I know that this place actually still exists, let's see if we can go even farther. And so I took several months, and I went and did research in several different archives, the Philadelphia City Archives and the Microfilm Library and the Philadelphia Historical Commission, and went to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and I went into the catacombs of Minas Tirith in Gondor to unearth all the information about this house and to trace the deeds for the house and see, could I get it all the way back to William Jones and figure out who was living in this house over the last 2 centuries, and put to this whole, and also, like, what's the deal with 233 Spruce Street, right? This is still an anomaly that we need to solve. So one thing I came across pretty soon after my research, I was looking through old on newspapers.com, came across some old wanted ads from the Philadelphia Inquirer from the 1830s. They're some racist wanted ads for sure. Wanted a cook and girl to do the parlor and chamber work, both white women. The washing put out. Apply at number 233 Spruce Street, a few doors below 8th Street. This is very encouraging. Child's nurse wanted, a respectable white woman accustomed to the care of children may hear of a situation by applying at number 233 Spruce Street, a few doors below 8th. So by the 1830s, whoever was living in this house, turns out it was the father of Wilson's publisher. We'll get into that later. Whoever was living in this house, the number by the 1830s was confusing people. So confusing that when they put these wanted ads, they had to say 233. Oh, it's below 8th. Don't go down to 2nd Street, right? That's what this is saying. And so clearly the house number hadn't been changed yet. But when I got into the deed, the chain of deeds in the microfiche library up at the Philadelphia City Archives, I found in the 1861, in one of the deeds, we find that the number changed from 233 to 733, because the 1861 deed transfer says it is now number 733. And before that, all of the deeds used landmarks to describe the property. There was no number in the deed paperwork going back until we get to this point, and then it's now 733. So they fixed that problem. So around 1860, the house number changed from 233 to 733. And that brought the house number in line with the citywide numbering scheme, which was by then quite standardized. And so we're bringing this old historic house sort of in line with the modern system of numbers, and it only took changing one little number from a 2 to a 7 to make this happen. And so I kept going with the deeds, kept tracing them back and back and back, and sure enough, I found the original deed where William Jones bought the property from John Taylor Cox. His house, remember, was just a couple doors down, 1803. Right? And so Cox sold. So here's what happened. That lot north of Spruce Street between 7th and 8th was owned by the Society of Friends, and they were going to make it a cemetery there. And there was, for whatever reason, the plans to develop that lot into a cemetery didn't come to pass, and the society ended up selling it to Cox. And Cox split it up into different parcels and sold off some of that himself. He kept one of the lots and built his own house there, but he sold this lot to William Jones in 1802. So now I went into the Philadelphia Register series. There are publications going back to the 18th century of, it's essentially a phone book. Before there were phones, there were these register books that would be published once a year that would have name, occupation, and address for notable people in Philadelphia who were business owners or tradespeople of different kinds. And so I went in there and looked for William Jones plasterer. Okay, first of all, let me say something about plasterer. Who is William Jones? William Jones was one of his friend Thackeray, William Thackeray Jr. They had a plastering business. Thackeray and Jones. And Thackeray and Jones, when they were in their 20s, they got hired to do the interior plaster work in Congress Hall and Independence Hall and these famous, now famous American buildings. They were interior plasterers, and they were original signers of the first labor union in the United States. Was the Master Plasterer Company of Philadelphia or something like that. There's a vellum charter in the Historical Society of Pennsylvania with William Jones's signature on it. He was a member of this trades community as a plasterer, and he's a construction worker and building and developing homes. And guess what? 731, right next to the Jones house, is a house that was built for Thackeray. So Thackeray and Jones, their company, they live next door to each other, and they were building these brick houses out on the frontier in Philadelphia in the first decade of the 19th century. And so I look up William Jones in the register. Guess who else I find? First of all, Jones is living at 45 George. There's another guy living at 45 George, and that's Alexander Lawson, this guy who we're looking at right here. Lawson is another Scottish immigrant, and he's an engraver, and he is the primary engraver for Wilson's Ornithology. Lawson engraved 50% of the plates, the copper plates that were used to print the images of the birds that were then hand colored for this extravagant book. So Lawson and William Jones are living together at 45 George Street, which is now Sansom Street, and this is 1802. So this is when Jones buys the property from Cox. He and Lawson are living over down the street. And then 1803, they're still living there together. And then 1804, Lawson and Jones both move to Spruce above 7th. So Lawson moved with Jones, and they moved out to the new house that Jones is building out there at Spruce above 7th, and which is, we're going to call the Jones house from now on. So if I say Jones house, that's what we're talking about, which is Wilson's house. And so this is a construction site. I happen to live in a construction site. My landlord is currently renovating this old federal style brick home on our property out in Chester County. And it's, there's muddy pits and debris, and there's piles of bricks and mortar, and it's a construction site. And guess what? If you're a self-employed engraver, you've got your equipment at home, you've got like nitric acid and engraving tools and all these chemicals and varnish, you're cleaning these plates that is also a dirty job to be an engraver at that time. And Lawson was a self-employed engraver. He was engraving the plates before he got into the ornithology business. He was engraving plates for medical magazines. For Philadelphia Medical Magazine in particular was his #1 go-to, which was sort of scientific illustrations of surgeries and different illnesses and things for this community. And so Lawson and Jones move out to the Jones house out on the frontier in 1804. The same year is when we have the very first primary evidence of Lawson and Wilson connecting. Our first letter between the two of them. We know from Lawson's daughter that they actually had met several years earlier in 1798. But then they kind of lost touch with each other. And then in 1804, when Lawson and Jones moved out to this house on the frontier, they reconnected. The reason they reconnected, how this happened, is that Jones had another property which was out in Kingsessing, which was actually a farmhouse, a big yellow farmhouse, and Wilson was teaching out around 48th and Woodland Avenue in West Philly, where the Union School, one-room schoolhouse, Wilson was teaching there, starting in 1802. This is where he met William Bartram and started doing the whole birding thing. Jones owned that farmhouse. That was actually his great-grandfather's house. their family owned that going all the way back to New Sweden. And that farmhouse is now demolished and gone. It is sort of on the south end of Clark Park, right where Clark Park meets Woodland Avenue, is where this old farmhouse was that Wilson was living in. And so Wilson, Jones, who was his landlord, Jones is moving out to this out to Spruce above 7th, and like, why don't you all get together? And Wilson writes in March 1804 to Lawson, and he says, "I dare say you begin me to think you think me very ungenerous and unfriendly in not seeing you for so long a time. I am most earnestly bent on pursuing my plan of making a collection of all the birds in this part of North America. The roads have been generally so bad that we must mutually excuse each other for past omissions, and by our own future sociability prevent the chain of friendship from getting rusty. Compliments to Mr. Jones." Let's be friends. Yeah. And so Wilson starts going over to the Jones house and hanging out with Jones and Lawson and talking about birds. And he's got this idea of doing this book about birds. And this is all still very much a dream in Wilson's mind. He's out there collecting specimens, and but he doesn't have a publisher. And Lawson's a professional. He needs to be paid. Wilson doesn't have the money to pay Lawson to do any of this work. And so Wilson's got these grand dreams. And so Wilson gets it in his mind. This is the DIY ethic, where Wilson's like, you know what? I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to etch the birds' images myself. Like, I'll bet I can do it. He goes and gets copper plate, and he gets the tool, and he starts etching. He does his drawing. And this is the method he used. So on the polished copper plate, a coat of varnish is thinly spread. The design of the bird is then traced and cut through to the copper with an instrument termed a point. Then a bank of wax is raised around the plate, and aquafortis, nitric acid, is poured into the enclosure, which eats into the copper only where the point has passed. So this is how they're etching this plate. Mr. Lawson was, of course, consulted on this occasion and cheerfully contributed his advice and assistance in the novel and difficult enterprise. Wilson provided the copper, and his friend having laid the varnish and furnished the necessary tools, he eagerly commenced this important operation, on the successful termination of which his happiness seemed to depend. This is very likely happening in the Jones house. This is where Lawson's workshop is. He works at home and engraves copper plates. This is a quote from George Ord from the last volume who is the executor of Wilson's estate and editor of the final posthumous volumes. And so the next day, after Mr. Wilson had parted from his preceptor, the latter, to use his own words, was surprised to behold Wilson bouncing into the room, crying out, "I've finished my plate. Let us bite it in with the aquafortis at once, for I must have a proof before I leave town." He's super eager. And Lawson burst into laughter at the ludicrous appearance of his friend, animated with impetuous zeal, and to humor him, granted his request. The proof was taken, but fell far short of Mr. Wilson's expectations or of his ideas of correctness. Yes, exactly. So a proof is a print, the first print that you make from the newly etched or engraved plate. Okay, so that process, the etching using the acid to cut into the copper, is different than engraving. Engraving, a tool called a graver is used by Lawson, in this case, the engraver, and cut directly into the copper. It takes a lot more artistry to do the high quality engraving. And it was a skill set that Lawson had expertise in and Wilson had none. And so on the 30th of October, 1804, when Haynes catches the yellow bird at Pennsylvania Hospital, this is exactly the time when Wilson is working on the etching of plate 1, which just so happens to feature the American goldfinch, which I thought was just a wonderful omen. And believe it or not, in this building downstairs in the archives, we have the original proof that Wilson etched. And in the bottom of it, it says A. Wilson Fessett. Alexander Wilson did this. And he sent this proof to William Bartram, which is why it still survives today. And so on the 29th of November, Wilson writes to Bartram, "Dear sir, I have been amusing myself this some time in attempting to etch, and now send you a proof sheet of my first performance in etching. In this way, my next attempt in etching will perhaps be better, everything being new to me in this. I will send you the first impression I receive after I finish the plate." And so if we zoom in here on the American goldfinch head, on the left, we see Wilson's etching. And on the right, we see Lawson's engraving of the same drawing. And we can see all the fine detail that is put into the engraving that is missing from this etching. And so when Wilson etches this bird, he's like, all right, it was fun, but this isn't going to work. We're never going to sell anything if all the plates look like this. And so it was a failure. And Wilson was kind of, it must have been an uncomfortable situation to be in. A proposition was now made to Mr. Lawson to engage in the work on a joint concern, but there were several reasons which this gentleman adduced sufficiently weighty, in his opinion, to warrant his non-acceptance of the offer. Mr. Wilson, finding his schemes thus baffled, declared with solemn emphasis his resolution of proceeding alone in the publication, if it even cost him his life. "I shall at last leave," continued Wilson, "a small beacon to point out where I perished." Thank goodness he left that beacon, because we found where he perished now. So Wilson quit his teaching job. After this event, he moved into the Jones house full time with Lawson and with Jones, and he started working for a publishing firm, Bradford and Inskeep, which is a brand new startup publishing firm, Samuel Bradford and John Inskeep. And he was charming enough and showed them his drawings, and they were convinced that they were going to finance this work. And they had some startup capital from John Inskeep Sr., and the Inskeep's father invested, and they were off to the races. And Wilson, over a very short period of time, 1808 was the first volume published, and the seventh volume by 1813. Wilson was gaining momentum, he was starting to get popular around the States because he was traveling a lot and getting subscribers and doing the whole thing. And he was a rising star until he wasn't. And in August 1813, Wilson's health was deteriorating over months. He mentioned to Bartram at one point, I think in like July of that year, that he had hardly left the house half an hour, and his colorists had abandoned the project, and he was working overtime to fill their duties to try to, because he had to whip these things out. And these plates, the text is one thing. That's just going into a letterpress. The plates, though, are a lot of labor. Not only do you have to have the engravings, and then you get the prints of the monochrome prints, but then you got to paint them all by hand. And each volume has multiple plates with multiple figures on every plate. And eventually, by the time we're getting to 1813, we're talking hundreds of plates in order to, and he doesn't have the team to help him get this done on time. So Wilson's kind of working himself to death, and he knows it. He starts getting sick, keeps working hard because he's under these deadlines from the publisher. And Wilson passes away in August 1813 in the Jones house. It's where he died, and it's where his funeral was held, because that's where his body was. And then they had a procession the next day and took his body down to Old Swedes Cemetery and put him into William Jones, his landlord, gave up his own plot at Old Swedes, and put Wilson there. And that's how he ended up there. So the Jones house is at 733 Spruce Street. Still is. This is the location of the original etching experiments, which were the first moment of production for this book. Wilson's home during the production, the entire production was at the Jones house. This is where Wilson died, in this house, and this house was completely overlooked by scholars until last year. It has been privately owned since before 1802. As long as that house has been standing, there's been people living inside of it. And it's listed on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places since 1957, because it's well known that this is an old building, and dates to 1805. And that actually earlier than that, right? 1802 is when he bought the property and then building the house. So it's a known historic site, which alone qualifies it to be on the registry and to be on the Philadelphia Historical Commission in their files and everything. But nobody knows what happened there. We know it's an old house, and that's the only reason that it's on these lists. The significance to American art and science is just now coming to light. And so in November of last year, I rang the doorbell after I'd done all this work, and this gentleman on the left, John Cornell, answered the door. And he said, and John's partner, Seymour, is, I learned this on the stoop of the Jones house. I said, hi, my name is Matthew. I'm a historian and a scientist at the Academy of Natural Sciences, and I've been doing some research about your house. And I was just hoping that I might be able to share some of that information with you and ask you some questions. And this guy, John, was like, oh, like, okay, well, my partner, Seymour, owns this house, and he's 92 years old, and he is confined to his bedroom. Would you like to come in and tell him about it? And so John took me upstairs. You'll see that the staircase has a white railing, a white lift to help Seymour get up and down the stairs. So they've retrofitted this house so they can live in it comfortably. But the rooms, the original configuration, they're obviously art collectors. They got a lot of art on the walls. And so I went up to the second floor into Seymour's bedroom, and here he is sitting by his bedside. And I sat there and I told him the story of Wilson and his house and the whole story I've told you so far. And Seymour is 92. He has lived on that block of Spruce Street for 88 years. He's lived in 3 or 4 different houses on that block. And one of the things he said to me when I told him the story, he goes, he's like, I always wanted to live in one of those historic houses. Like, I always wanted to live in a house where something cool happened, And he said, please feel free to snoop around, and John will take you through the house. Took me up to the attic. There's a 3.5 stories. There's this weird little half story at the top of the structure with this window, and it's a bedroom. And you go up to that and you peek out that little bedroom. From that bedroom window, you could have seen the dome of Pennsylvania Hospital, the Pine Street building from there. During Wilson's time, it would have been unobstructed. And then I went through the whole house and then down into the cellar and then down into the sub-cellar. There's this is a second basement, which is a root cellar, which is still, these are these images on the right here of the original brickwork. And you can notice that along on that original brickwork is like the remnants of a coat of white plaster. This is William Jones, the plasterer's house, right? This is where there's some wine sitting down there nowadays. That, you know, down in the basement they've got laundry, and it's just it's a house with people living in it, and there's junk and boxes of stuff that they've been holding on to for 30 years and hoping that someday they'll use, just like all of us. You know, it's a home, and but we can imagine the history that happened in these rooms, and the we get a actually get a setting, you know, physical space to imagine the production of these copper plates. So I wrote up a long, dense research paper. If you know me, you know that's one of the things I like to do. This is going to be published in Archives of Natural History, which is one of the premier history of science journals in the world, and it is published in Edinburgh, Scotland, which is fitting for a story about Wilson. And this paper should be out any day now. It's the October issue, so literally any day it's going to appear. And it tells the whole story with much more detail than I've told you tonight. And it's very carefully sourced with all of these primary sources that I've dug out of all of these different archives to firmly establish the provenance of this house and what happened there and why it's important. And my next step is to fundraise for a historical marker. The Wick House just recently put up this historical marker just this past year, and the director there told me that it all told it cost about $2,000 to get to go through the Pennsylvania Historical Agency or whatever it is that adjudicates these kind of things. You got to prove that the place is actually the historical. I've done that, so we're ready to move forward. And John and Seymour have given me the green light to erect a historical marker out in front of the house that's going to say American Ornithology. But the future preservation of this house is greatly in question. It's privately owned. It's going to depend on the generosity of the people who live there in the future. John expressed some concern to me that he's worried that once he and Seymour are gone, that whoever owns the house next is gonna not like all these tight hallways and is gonna want to break down some of the walls and open it up so I have a bigger kitchen and that kind of thing. Currently, Seymour did some renovations back in the 1980s when he bought the house. Notably, he removed a coat of white plaster from the outside of the building that he thought was not original. May have been original, we're not quite sure. Got photos of it, some historical photos that show the original plaster on the front. So he restored the exterior of the house and did some interior decor and stuff, but you know, didn't knock down any walls. The room configurations are all the same. Probably the bedroom the parlor right when you walk in is probably where Wilson's body was laid. There's a fireplace in the front room, which is probably where the funeral was held. And we can imagine all of the notable scientists from the Philadelphia community, and including the founders of the Academy. Wilson was elected to the Academy just shortly before he died. So, which is, and also Alexander Lawson was also a member of the Academy as well. So, future of this house, it's going to depend on, you know, maybe in some ideal world, the house could, you know, a nonprofit foundation could be set up to relieve the property of the burden of taxes, to preserve it as a museum in the long term. But really that depends on the people who own it. and what they want to do with it and what they decide to do with it. But in the meantime, we want to get this sign up as soon as possible. I think the faster I can get this historical marker erected, that's going to be a layer, a safeguard against even more disruption to the property once any new owners are going to have a lot harder time knocking down walls once they realize what they're knocking down, right? So we've got some uncertainty in the future, but one of the nice things here is that anybody can swing by on 733. Don't go knocking on their door and ringing the doorbell, please. But you can go over there and sit on the stoop, right? And put your boot into that boot rocker and just sit there and think about the past and all of the change that has happened here in Philadelphia. And, you know, some things change and some things don't really change. You know, at the end of October, you're still going to see flocks of yellowbirds in Philadelphia. And and here we are, you know, nerding out on birds the same way that Wilson was nerding out on birds 200 years ago. So some things change and some things don't so much. So lots of people contributed to this, especially all of these, the archivists and the staff of all of the Philadelphia City Archives and the historical societies. And here at the Academy, the archivists are doing a great job preserving all these historic documents, because without the paper trail, would never have been able to draw the dots, connect all these lines to really establish the provenance of this house. And who knows what the future will hold and what we may learn yet about this house and Wilson's story in Philadelphia. But some of we're starting to have a framework that physical places that we can go. Up until now, the story of Wilson is told over at Bartram's Garden. And that was a kind of peripheral place for Wilson. He spent some time over there, certainly over the summers in 1811, 1812, spent quite a bit of time over there, and befriended Bartram. And that's an important place for American ornithology, no doubt, for lots of reasons, including Bartram's own contributions to the science. Another place we could go, you know, was over to Independence Hall, because this was where the Philadelphia Museum was. The Charles Wilson Peale's Museum was in the second floor up in the long room in Independence Hall at that time when Wilson visited in 1804 and thereafter until his death. But again, that's kind of a peripheral place for the story of American ornithology. It's the Jones House was ground zero. This is where Wilson was toiling late at night, and it's where he never left the house for half an hour, except for half an hour. And so it's a place that hopefully we can all start to swing by there and just reconnect to the history a bit more, because history is what brings us meaning in our modern day. When we realize that the things that we're doing are often we're repeating things that have been done in the past, and sometimes without even knowing it. And if you know it, suddenly it brings you this whole new level of oh, that's really cool. You know, it makes me Philly's great for that kind of thing. So that's all I got. I'm going to take questions if anybody has some questions. Yes, yeah, I have a full timeline of when the residential movements of Wilson and Lawson and Jones. Yep, and I trace in the paper. I trace all the entire 200-year history of the house, all the owners. After Wilson died, Jones lived there for until about 1823 when he passed away. Then his wife was renting the place out to other folks. Eventually, it was bought by the unmarried sister of Wilson's publisher, and the Inskeeps moved into the Jones house. And John Inskeep Sr. was twice mayor of Philadelphia. So this house has quite a history beyond American ornithology as well. Bert?
Yeah, my question is about the engraver Lawson. Did he run his entire business out of that property, or did he have another location, or speak to that for a minute?
Sure. So making these plates involved a whole team of people, first of all. There's the engraver, then there's the printer. The Joseph Brown was a guy who was doing the printing. So the copper plates were delivered to Joseph Brown's house. Brown moved around a few different times, mostly in South Warwick neighborhood, during the production of American Ornithology. So there was printing of the, so when Wilson went to pick up the prints, that wasn't at the Jones house. There was Robert Carr's letterpress printing shop, which is the text that goes into the book was being laid out by Robert Carr, who later married Nancy Bartram, William Bartram's niece, and the Carr garden over at Bartram Garden is their family. And so that is another place where this work was happening. And then about a year after Wilson moved in, Lawson got married and had a daughter, Malvina, and in 1806. So before any of these volumes were published, Lawson's already got a family growing. And he moves one block and a half around the corner on the other side of Pennsylvania Hospital on Pine Street. And so the original Wilson also was sort of in and out, itinerant in some ways. He went on long expeditions, but when he came back to town, that's where he went, was back to the Jones house. And my guess is that Lawson had, Jones was a subscriber to American Ornithology as well. And Jones moved out. Once the production started, he went and started living at one of his other properties. My guess is that even after Lawson moved out of the Jones house to raise his family just down the block, he probably kept his workshop set up in the Jones house. My guess is that was sort of, he continued to work there because either Wilson was either renting the space, but that doesn't seem right either. It's probably that Wilson gave Jones a subscription to American Ornithology to cover his board. We don't have the receipts for these kind of things, so it's a little bit speculative. And certainly there could be some, Lawson may have done some of the work, off-site or something, I don't know. But certainly like copper plates are heavy, and you've got all of this corrosive chemicals and the tools, and you're in a workshop, your tools are heavy, and you're not moving them around so much. It's not as much of, and he was also, Lawson probably also had a roller press, like maybe a smaller roller press to run off some quick proofs to see if, testing things as they're going along. So I think that's about all I know, Bert, and hopefully we can uncover some more.
I think what you're saying is we know he lived there, and we speculate that a lot of his work was done there, but we also speculate it had to be done in probably some other places.
Oh, it certainly was. But and not all the plates were engraved by Lawson. My guess is that Benjamin Tanner probably engraved his plate down to his place. And Warnick was probably doing his plates over his own plate. But most likely this is some work that was being done as a self-employed guy. Lawson's probably set his workshop up at home the way we would do today.
And I do a question at the Zoom, and then we'll come back to the room.
Yep.
Do you want to read that? Thanks.
All right. Hey, Sean. I don't know what chemicals they used in the engraving process, but Wilson worked inside all day and night. Do you think the chemicals may have contributed to his ill health? It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. We know that his dysentery, which is what he had doctors come, checked him out when he was dying on his deathbed in the Jones house. Down at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, there is a ledger by a physician who is also a subscriber to American Ornithology, who is attending Wilson's bedside, and he diagnosed it as dysentery. Dysentery is a parasitic infection of the intestinal tract, either an amoeba or a bacterial infection. It's bad. It's lousy sanitation is what leads to that.
and dysentery was the leading cause of death in Philadelphia at that time. It was pretty gross around, the way that we, I think we're used to modern standards of cleanliness. And I think that in those days, it was harder to deal with sewage and some of the modern things that we take for granted. So it's possible that there was some sort of chemical contamination, who knows? But certainly the Occam's razor, I think, would just tell me that he, some bacterial from feces got into his food source. That's probably what happened. Marty?
So I got a little confused, so can you clarify? I thought Lawson declined to do the etchings. Who did the etchings, and in any case, there's plates still exist?
Yep.
Can you repeat the question too?
Yeah, I will. So Marty asked, he said he thought that Lawson declined to do the etchings. He did until they got Bradford and Inskeep on board. And once Bradford and Inskeep agreed to finance this endeavor, the deal that was made was that Wilson would furnish the drawings and the text, the content for this book, and that Bradford and Inskeep would finance the production of it. And Lawson agreed to that on condition that, he's being commissioned to engrave these plates the same way he would have been commissioned to engrave the plates for the medical magazine. So once the money was in place, Lawson was all good.
Those plates still exist?
Yes, a portion of them do. Here in the Academy archives, there's the first 10 plates, I believe, out of 76 total plates for American Ornithology, which is an auspicious number in Philadelphia. And there are some scattered plates at other institutions. The entire set is not extant, but some minority, probably fewer than 20 or something are left.
I was just curious, why was it ever labeled as 233? I didn't get that.
I have no idea. No.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, why was the house originally numbered 233? I have no idea. There's no record of that anywhere. There's a record of the number changing.
Maps that show the numbering scheme or anything?
No, and if you go back into the early Philadelphia maps and look at numbering scheme, it was pretty chaotic. And there were different numbering schemes on either side of certain roads, and the same numbers would be repeated. And it's pretty difficult to track down house numbers from early Philadelphia to the actual places that they are today. So yeah, there's some ambiguity there that maybe someday we'll find out, but or maybe not.
So the 33 was correct. It's just a 2.
Yep.
So I wondered if the 2 was mistaken for a 7 or right?
It's possible. Well, it's possible then the United States Gazette got it wrong. If that's true. But the problem is we know that that's not true because those 1830s newspaper clippings said number 233 Spruce Street, the same as the United States Gazette. So that's probably there really was a number that got changed. Hold on one, Bert. We'll take one here and then we'll get you. Okay, Krista says, fascinating. Have you talked with Paul Steinke at Preservation Alliance? Its journal extant is always identifying houses that need preservation. I think you'd be a good ally. I don't know Paul, but I will look into that. Okay, great. Yep, Bert, you got another question?
Pass on the fact that speaking several years ago with Joel Fry, who's a mutual friend of ours who's passed away, he was the curator at Bartram's Garden. He said that he understood that it was the Postal Service that came in and standardized the house numbers at some point, because it was chaotic up to the point where the developers could put their own numbers on it.
Yep.
And then it was the Postal Service came in and standardized, and that's what the name change, the number change came from. But further research needs to be done on that.
Yeah, and Joel just passed away last year or 2 years ago, and he was the longtime curator over at Bartram's Garden and a real scholar of Philadelphia history and the history of Wilson and Bartram and unfortunately Joel's not around. Man, if he was here today, I would love to pick his brain about this. And he had a lot of knowledge and stuff that never got down on paper. So I dedicated the paper that is coming out to Joel. Yeah, to honor him. So. Oh, Judy says, how can we contribute to the historical marker? I'm so glad you asked, Judy. I am writing up a small proposal and I'm going to approach the DVOC council about this to see if we can't drum up this money to get this done. Greg says, how was Wilson supporting himself? If he was not eating very well, that may have contributed to vitamin deficiencies, which may have set him up for the dysentery. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think there's this, in the literature, you find sometimes this kind of exaggeration of Wilson's poverty. This became kind of a narrative, late 19th century. This poor Wilson, overcame everything to do this great thing. That's a little bit of exaggeration because we have Malvina Lawson. We have her testimony from when she met Wilson when she was a kid. He used to come into her dad's workshop and hang out, and she said that he was like very prim and like dressed very nicely and had a ruffled collar and like, that he wasn't, it conflicts with the destitute poverty narrative. So whether Wilson was eating well, I don't know. He could have been eating well, but he just had some contaminated food, which is not so hard to do if you're living out on the frontier in a construction site.
Matt, what's surprising though, if I may, what's surprising is Salmonella, Shigella, the kinds of bacteria that cause dysentery and amoeba were highly contagious. And Jones lived. Jones did not die of this, as far as we know. I actually looked while you were talking. I looked up whether cholera had hit Philly by then, and it had not. It wasn't until 1832, so it wasn't cholera. But anyway, it's just interesting. They're living in close quarters, and Wilson dies of it. That's what I'm trying to understand.
There's always a little speculation, and there's also some apocryphal anecdotes. There's an apocryphal anecdote of where that Wilson saw a rare bird that he was in search of, and it flew across the river, and he swam across the river to get it, and then he got it, but then he also caught a fever, and he died from the fever. Right, so like clearly there's some is he really swimming across the river? How did he keep his gunpowder dry? Right, right. There's questions that throw some doubt on these stories. Probably he just got a bacterial infection, guys. Right, I mean, it's just the truth. Anybody else?
Proposed language for the sign.
I'm working on it. It needs to be very concise. I think it needs to say American Ornithology in big letters, and then say something about how Alexander Wilson lived here with his engraver, and that this is where the first the early production of the first book on birds was produced. There's also some potential to raise funds for this through the Scottish Heritage Foundation, the Swedish Heritage Foundation societies around here. This is a early a historic site that was constructed by an early Swedish settler that is connected to that community as well. So the great thing about this Jones house is that it intersects a lot of different communities, art and science and cultural heritage. And so there's potentially a very broad constituency of folks who'd be interested in preserving this building. And I'm on the council of the Wilson Ornithological Society. There's folks that are involved with this society as well, which is a nationwide society with hundreds of members. So I got my work cut out for me.
Just curious about the grave site on was that Columbus Avenue? Columbus Boulevard. Where exactly on Columbus Boulevard?
Right at Christian, right across the street from where you're going to be on 14th.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty much right across from the Sheet Workers Union. Yep. Yep, and
Washington Avenue on Columbus Boulevard.
yep, it's an eBird hotspot.
There's a question here, too.
Andy?
I think it's interesting that you hypothesized that the yellow bird was a goldfinch because it's in October and goldfinches aren't yellow in October.
That's Wilson's name for the bird. Yellow bird.
It's actually a Wilson's bird.
Oh, well, Wilson's warbler was already mounted in Peale's museum by that time, before Wilson found it.
And there's a question.
One more. What was the size of the plates? The size of the plates is about this big. I don't know, what about?
I don't think people.
About like, I don't know, 8 by 10 or something. These, it's the pages of a book. In that this is not the double elephant folio paper like Audubon was doing.
About 14 by 16.
14 by 16 for Wilson's. Okay, so they're much smaller. Any more? I know we're over time here and people are probably itching
Any
to
other
get over it.
questions? Anybody on Zoom? Last chance. You can unmute yourself if you're on Zoom and have a question.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Matt. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Wonderful as always.
Thanks, everybody on Zoom.
Terrific, Matt. Loved it.
Hope you all make it to the banquet.